Every morning, the countdown begins for the markets with meticulous research and analysis designed to help you capitalize on the trading day. Beaming live from the CNBC TV 18 Motilal Oswal studio.
Good morning. You're with us here on a fresh new edition of Bazaar Morning Call. If you're surprised, well, don't be, because it's a really packed start to what is essentially a very, very eventful week, eventful day as well. But first up, I want to wish all of you viewers a very happy Navratri season. So festivities, of Navratris to you, to your families, to your co-workers. Hope this sort of brings prosperity, because in terms of policy push, policy nudges, there is enough and more which point to that direction. As I said, it's jam-packed. Well, we are coming to you live from the CNBC TV 18 Motilal Oswal studios. I'm Prashant. With me, my colleagues Nigel and Rima. Guys, good morning.
Morning.
Hi, good morning. So festivities, the GST rate cut comes into effect. Modi has termed it Bachat Ka Utsav.
Yeah.
So there could be a boost to consumption, but on the other hand, the IT sector will be on the edge on the back of that 88 lakh H-1B visa fee.
Well, that's right. And we don't know what Mr. Trump is going to do next, but I think we could possibly be heading into the best consumption phase for Indian economy. Probably. GST 2.0, RBI rate cuts, income tax benefits will flow through. And as you said, Diwali just a month or so ago. So let's see how this goes.
Spotty all the way into the end of the year.
Oh, wow.
Okay, well, let's just kick it off with a bunch of things as we sort of look at, as we start this session, right? So Navratri kicks off. It's the auspicious 9-day period. Shraddh ended yesterday, and this is essentially a phase where spending picks up. People wait for the end of the Shraddh to actually purchase what they want. GST cuts also, of course, come into effect from today. Of course, many companies, especially in the auto space, have announced cuts. But in terms of actual deliveries, etc., people wait for the end of Shraddh. Actually, even for bookings, many would wait for the end of the Shraddh period to start, doing all of that in this auspicious period, Navratri period. So I very much on the festive demand. And I think, people will be closely watching, in that sense, almost like what's happening in all categories. Autos, of course, really top of the list, because that is the one space where this is likely to show up in a bigger way, both two-wheelers, four-wheelers, etc. as well. So gold, autos, discretionary spends, really what's happening. I think people will be watching this week on week for whether markets have run up. Many of these sectors have done well. Now, of course, you've got to have evidence that actually demand is picking up in all these areas. So Prime Minister Modi yesterday spoke at 5 p.m. Of course, there was that GST next-gen reforms and talk about the GST Bachat Utsav, as Rima said. But to me, I think the call for states to prioritize manufacturing and focusing on self-reliance, buy Swadeshi, that kind of stuff really resonated because, it kind of sort of ties in with what the government has been trying to do, starting with the PLI schemes, etc., a few years ago. And I think there is renewed focus now. Even that speech which I think Prime Minister Modi gave on Saturday, I think it was in Bihar, where he kind of sort of said that the biggest vulnerability for India is essentially depending on other countries. So, the focus thrust very much seems to be manufacturing and make in India, make what you can here and do not import. So, it's a broader kind of message, but I think an important one. Now, President Trump's H-1B visa is finally managed to drag services into the trade war. So far, it was all about goods, but now services, there is a bit of a question mark as well. Near-term impact, and we'll talk more about this. Rima will put out some numbers as well. We're getting commentary from managements who are listed, companies which are listed. Near-term impact may be limited on IT revenue and margins as well. I don't think there is... that is a very large fear in that sense. And of course, in the medium term, longer term, what is the solution? Basically, don't do work on site and get those H-1B sort of workers on site to do this work. Do it offshore. GCCs, global capability centers, etc., perhaps are another way to go. But, I think what this does, of course, is hurt multiples for IT services companies, because, as I said, so far it was only about goods. Now there is, of course, services into the mix as well. There is also talk of this Hire Act, basically restraining a tax on work which is offshore to outside US. That is basically in the Congress. It'll be debated, etc. We don't know if it will be passed, but I think that is a much bigger impact if it does get through, as some are saying it will, by the end of the year. Basically, caps upsides, increases uncertainty in that sense, at least in the next in the next quarter or 2 quarters or so. So that's the space, I think, which obviously does react in a negative sense. The other way, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is in the US for trade and BTA negotiations, bilateral trade negotiations. Focus in US this week, just to go back to the US market, Fed speakers, as I said, Fed cut last week, but I think the Trump appointee, Stephen Miran, is going to speak today on Monday, and markets will be waiting to see if he's going to be critical. He's going to demand 150 basis points worth of cuts this year. More, we'll see. But I think that will be the headline when we come back tomorrow morning. Fed rate cuts last week, even as hard data remains very strong in the US. US economy remains pretty strong. And of course, financial conditions remain very, very loose. Friday's change, not very much, except the fact that the dollar index in the last 3 sessions is up about 1% or so. Equities were higher, and of course the 10-year yield moved up another 2 basis points or so. Now, just to tie in the levels, the Nifty posted a negative close on Friday. Remember, it had done about a 1,000-point rally in the prior 14 sessions, but we are still trading above the 40-hourly exponential moving average, which becomes the immediate support. 25,244 is that level. It's about 100 points down from where we closed on the Nifty. Bank Nifty had a 12-day winning streak. It saw a negative close on Friday. Here, the support stand again at the 40-hourly exponential average, which is 55,261. So those are levels. GIFT Nifty gives you a quick sense of how we're likely to start. I think the last I saw, maybe about a 80, 90-point cut. Yeah, about a 90-odd point cut. And I presume bulk of this, of course, will be from the IT services pack, which is still a large portion, a heavily weighted part of the market. Well, let's just get to that story, right? The US has raised the annual H-1B visa fee to $1 lakh US dollars per applicant. I mean, we're going to talk and get lots of opinion, but just the basics for those who've not been watching probably or who want to understand this better. Prima.
Okay, so H-1B visa fee will now cost $100,000. But White House has clarified this will be a one-time petition fee, not an annual charge. If you have an H-1B visa, you are abroad right now, you can re-enter. You do not need to pay $100,000 to re-enter. And this is applicable only for new H-1B visas, not renewal. Also, this will now, from the timing point of view, for FY26, the H-1B visas are already in place. So it's not going to affect this year, but FY27 will get impacted. Markets were jittery. Over the weekend, we had Infosys and Wipro ADR down between 2 to 3%. And back home, Indian IT anyway has been underperforming, with the Nifty IT index down 15% on a YTD basis. A quick word on the street reactions. Now, BofA says that without any mitigating factors, if you just calculate how much Indian IT companies are sending people on H-1B and you apply the new higher fees, then the EPS impact will be 7 to 17% over a 3-year period, because your H-1B visa is typically for 3 years, but you can renew it for another 3 years. So 7 to 17% gross EPS impact. Okay, so on an annual basis, 2 to 6%. But remember, companies have a 12-month buffer. They can figure out how they want to, whether they want to be selective in sending H-1B visas. So there are mitigating factors. They believe Tech Mahindra is most impacted. Morgan Stanley says prima facie it looks negative, but they see minimal near-term impact. CLSA also echoes the same thing. If the companies bear the full impact, which is unlikely, they don't pass on the cost, they don't increase nearshoring or perhaps increase their local talent, then the EPS impact could be 6% to FY27. Mid-cap companies have quickly responded to this. First Source says no impact, zero dependency on H-1B visa. Coforge is saying only 65 petitions were sent, 63 got approved, and that is 0.2% of their workforce. Science says only 6 people, employees on H-1B visa, so no material impact. Persistent is they've not given out numbers, but they have said we don't see any significant impact. But, just to summarize, I think in the near term, there could be some margin pressure, but analysts believe that over the medium term or 3 to 5 year period, this can be nullified because of other measures, increase your outsourcing, increase nearshoring. But just FY27, there could be perhaps some margin impact.
Okay, well, Rima, that's pretty useful emotion.
But let's find out what the setup is looking like for today. Nigel's moved over to the big wall.
Well, we had a bit of a break in Friday's trading session, as you said, and the Nifty ended a little bit lower. But, and this morning, there's another 60, 70-point downtick that we're bracing ourselves for. So it's a bit of a test for the bulls. And I think that dip could actually get bought into, and I wouldn't be surprised at some point of time the Nifty moves into the green. Now, giving you the data points with regard to Friday's trading session, well, you had both the institutions that were buyers. But keep in mind, there was FTSE rebalance that took place on Friday, and that's why the FI participation was much higher than normal. So the gross volumes were more than double of what we normally see. Moving to, what happened in the F&O space? Well, there was some unwinding of positions, both on the Nifty as well as on the Nifty Bank itself. But what about the FI movement? Well, not too much movement, both on the long as well as on the short side. In fact, in line with what we saw on the Nifty open interest as well as the Nifty Bank open interest, there was some unwinding of long positions, while the short positioning continues at around 87%. And part of that short covering bounce has played out, because in the last few days, we have seen that the short positioning from around 1.91 lakh contracts, that's down to around 1.46 lakh contracts. So close to around 45,000 short contracts have got covered out. So part of that is in the price with regard to the bounce. But keep in mind, 1.46 lakh contracts on the short side is not small by any stretch of imagination. So this market is still net short. You get some good news. These shorts will have to scramble for cover. Moving to the PCR, well, a few sessions ago, it went to around 1.4. Now, that's cooled off to around 0.94 odd. So that's pretty good, right? Because you don't want that PCR to move towards at 1.6. Historically, when we see it move to around 1.5, 1.6, that's when the market comes in for a bigger correction. Moving to the options data, 25,400 call, 25,350 call. Both of them had a fair bit of open interest built up. So that's telling you the bears, they are waiting by at high levels. They believe that they can defend the higher levels. Well, there was some put writing as well. So that brings us to the levels. On the upside, the bears are counting on 25,500, 25,550 level holding out. So that's a crucial resistance mark. If we can get past this, then you get the next round of the uptrend. While on the downside, just for today, given that we have a 70-80 point downtick on the gift Nifty that is suggesting, 25,200, 25,225, that's the important mark. You don't want to break that. And in fact, if you're adventurous, maybe getting in closer to these levels will be important. The Nifty Bank, that was the one that was leading the way. It had a bit of an off session in Friday's trading session. However, it holds above the 20 DMA and it ended around the 50 DMA. So you'll want it actually to cross the 50 DMA in today's trading session. Tech, that's going to be in focus because of the H-1B visa issues that we heard over the weekend. But let's see whether or not, initially there could be some kind of a dampener with regard to the start. But let's see whether or not that dip gets bought into. Moving to stocks that I'm looking at, well, we're looking at two stocks. Sammaan Capital, I told you on Friday itself, that's likely to move into the F&O ban. That's what happened. And RBL Bank, it's come out of the F&O ban, which again, we gave you a heads up on that one. The short's getting a little bit nervous on RBL Bank, and I'll keep an eye out on that stock even for today's trading session and the next few days. That's a stock to move at. But for the next month or so, we could be bracing for a very, very big boost on the consumption front, and maybe historic one as well. GST 2.0, RBI rate cuts, budget tax cuts, as well as festive season. We'll keep an eye out on some of these consumption-linked stocks. FMCG as well as autos will be in focus.